I wish you'd listen. I wish you'd listen. Walk, walk, ooh, walk. Till you what makes y'all say. Walk, walk, ooh, walk.
It's that folk back then would travel great distances to secure a future of positive instances. And though the journey was filled with danger, keeping faith in what's unseen to my people is no stranger. Did I mention all the miles that they covered in search of their hopes and dreams to discover? Seeking a life free of grueling labor and an opportunity to taste the city flavor. The way that it moved people out from the shared proper life of the South. The fact that without
Welcome everyone to our inaugural episode of the Bronzeville Trail Show, Recapturing and Making History. I am your host, Dr. Gloria McDaniel-Hall, and I am blessed to be on the board of the Bronzeville Trail Task Force. So what we'll do during our shows is that we're going to provide a little bit of information on what's going on with the Bronzeville Trail Project, explain to you exactly what it is. We'll provide some background information and context for you and let you know some of the latest happenings and upcoming events. So our show was kind of designed to focus on the central project, which is the Bronzeville Trail Project itself. And in addition to that, capturing some of our companion projects, some of the other things that we're doing in the community. And I am pleased today to welcome our esteemed Executive Director, Mr. John Adams. This trail project that he's going to talk about is his idea, his brainchild. He's going to give us some information about himself and the project and some upcoming things. So let's get started. John, welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored and delighted to be here at the inaugural
Yes.
Bronzeville Trail Show.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your history, John.
So I was born, educated, raised in Bronzeville, bought my first home in Bronzeville, my first two homes, in fact, including my first investment property in Bronzeville. I've worked in Bronzeville variously and spent 16 and a half years working as the Chief Financial Officer of the Rainbow Push Coalition, reporting to Reverend Jesse L. Jackson. And I mention that because the office was one block from Bronzeville. So although it's technically Kenwood, it still felt like I was working in Bronzeville.
And it's amazing because I think your high school, Hills Franciscan,
Yes.
is considered in Bronzeville, right?
Yeah, absolutely, on Cottage Grove.
That's
Yes.
how we met 1,000 years ago, but that's a
Yeah.
whole nother story.
Yeah.
So share with us a little bit how you even came up with the idea of using the embankment, and Monty's going to show a picture of it while we talk, but how you even came, were you just walking by this structure and said, voila, I think there should be a walking trail, and explain to people who are listening, like exactly what it is.
Okay. So I'm reasonably certain that I was driving past it, and I tell everyone, because certainly I've been asked this question numerous times, I can only attribute it to divine intervention. There was nothing acute that took place. It wasn't as if I had just left the Bloomingdale 606 Trail, or something of that nature, or read an article. At least I don't recall. And certainly having seen the embankment all of my life, I was curious as to what was happening with it. And I sent a text message to a retired architect friend of mine named Vernon Williams, who lives in Phoenix, Arizona. And Vernon went on Google Earth, took a look at the embankment, and said, John, it has potential. And the reason I could date it so certainly, because like so much in our lives are recorded and digitized, I sent Vernon a text message and I asked him to give me a call. So that was January of 2020.
Wow.
I like to remind people that in March, literally 6 weeks later, after I reached out to Vernon Williams, the state of Illinois shut down, the city of Chicago shut down, my employer shut down, and after probably spending good month, just transitioning into working from home, I just found myself with extra time on my hands. And so I began to reach out to some of the people that I know that I thought could share some wisdom on the development on such a project. And they sort of became like my kitchen cabinet, if I may, during May, June, July. And then approximately around July, August, we made the decision that we needed to incorporate. Okay. And in fact, incorporated the Bronzeville Trail Task Force, Inc. on September 8th, 2020. And during my time at Rainbow Push, I was fortunate to work with a gentleman named Walter Freeman, who owns his own printing company, E&F Design. It's the only Black-owned unionized printing shop in the city. Wow. And Walter and his firm did a lot of the printing for Rainbow Push, and Walter himself is a graphic designer. Walter lives in Bronzeville, and I reached out to Walter and shared this idea with him and asked Walter would he join me as an incorporator. And the second person that I reached out to was a gentleman who had worked for me in accounting at Rainbow Push. He had recently passed the CPA exam. His name is Robert Young. He too lived in Bronzeville. So the three of us became the incorporators of the Bronzeville Trail Task Force, Inc. Now we spent Gloria the remainder of the fall of 2020 assembling our board of directors. Okay. And from my experience in association management, if I may, as well as certainly my 16 plus years experience at Rainbow Push in the not-for-profit arena, I'm an expert on developing not-for-profits.
You really are.
And that's both in terms of certainly the financial structure, but also the operational dynamics. So we spent the fall, late fall into the winter, assembling people who we thought would make excellent board members. And it wasn't, very seriously, we only looked at people who we really thought could add value to the proposition. And so, I didn't call my cousin and Pookie and them and Ray Ray. I called professionals and people who already were demonstrating sincere passion for what was taking place in Bronzeville. Yes. And through that process, I met a gentleman named David Ali. I met 3 or 4 really key people, actually through social media, through Facebook. David Ali was the administrator for Group 39 Facebook page. I met Amadillo Kozan, who is a videographer through Facebook. I met Chris Devins, who has done more public art in Bronzeville than any other public artist. Yes. And so between the 3 of them and perhaps there are others, I met Sherry Williams, who is the founder and president of the Bronzeville Historical Society. In addition to people like the 4 I just mentioned, whom I did not know, I knew it was also important not only to have residential members, but institutional leaders, and reached out to Dr. Andrea Evans, who was head of the Crothers Center at Northeastern Illinois University, and reached out to Patricia Abrams, who was one of the people who helped save the Wabash Y MCA from demolition. And I want to come back to Pat Abrams, but I reached out to others who I thought might have some interest, in the project that represented either residential stakeholders like CPA Valerie Wright, institutional stakeholders. I reached out to a gentleman named Cecil Lucy, who's an attorney and a CPA. And I reached, and then lastly, a category that I now consider myself in, which is a legacy stakeholder, someone who, perhaps born and raised in Bronzeville, educated in Bronzeville, lived in Bronzeville. Maybe they don't live there now, but they certainly have a strong affinity towards what happens in Bronzeville. And so by the time we got to December, January, we pretty much had our initial board set. And in February, we reached out to Alderman Patricia Dow, Alderman of the 3rd Ward. And I might say that, one of the things I know being homegrown from Chicago is don't nobody want nobody that nobody sent. And feel free to Google that quote. It's a famous quote in the city of Chicago. I knew Pat Dow. Our sons had played basketball
At the YVI tournament?
at Providence St. Mill on the west side of Chicago back in the late 90s.
Okay.
That was middle to late 90s. So we had a relationship. And certainly a lot of the people that we coalesced and brought together already had their own relationships with Pat Dow, including Maiti Sinstak, who was on our board of the Sinstak family that founded the Chicago Defender and continues to operate the Bud Billiken Parade. So as I mentioned to you, I wanted to get back to Patricia Abrams because this is particularly important about the history of the project itself. So when I reached out to Pat Abrams, who at the time was executive director of the entity that owns the Wabash Y, she said, John, we had the same idea and presented it to the city back in 2005. And working with me at that time was an organization called BUD, Bronzeville Urban Development, BUD. And so BUD and I put together a proposal for the city of Chicago to repurpose the abandoned rail line to a walking, running, biking trail. And the city at that time, 2005, told that group that it was too risky. And that was certainly a shame because to get into the history of the rail line a bit, the rail line itself goes back to literally to the founding of the Chicago Union Stockyards.
John, can you tell people exactly where it is? Like people who, so I used to walk by it, walking down Drexel, and would see that and not even realize it was part of the embankment.
Yeah, so running east and west, essentially down 40th Street, 40th Street, is a rail line embankment that runs from Federal on the west to Lake Park on the east. And many of the overpasses have been removed. And so what the city has done, along with other public artists, is they've put murals on some of the embankment walls. Probably the one that's most visible and, arguably, is the mural that's on King Drive. And there's a portrait of former President Barack Obama on that particular mural. So that's the embankment. But back in 1865, a number of independent stockyards came together to form the Chicago Union Stockyard. And the date of origin is on the stockyard gates, 1865. Then in 1882, the Chicago Union Stockyard formed a partnership with a railroad, and they proposed to the city that that a rail line be laid between the stockyards, the back of the yards community, and the lakefront of Chicago. So the original stockyard line, as it was named, was a 4-mile rail line at grade level, roughly from 1882. And then in 1903, because not only this rail line, but other rail lines around the city, and this is an era certainly where rail was the primary mode of moving goods, services, even public transportation. Because they were grade level, they were killing people. There were too many accidents as they ran at grade level. And the Chicago City Council in 1903 voted for certain rail lines to run on embankments. And so that construction began, and the embankment that the stockyard line ran on, the embankment that we've proposed to repurpose to a linear park, was finished in 1907. So from 1907 till approximately 1947, the line was used primarily for commercial and industrial purposes. There was some passenger usage of it, certainly taking people to the stockyards. People who worked in the stockyards got on that rail line. The rail line has, let's say, some infamous history in that in 1919, and we all know the story of
The massacre.
pretty much how the massacre began with a black young man drifting into white waters of Lake Michigan, segregated waters of Lake Michigan. And so we all know that story of how it started, but ground zero of a lot of the fighting and the killing was the back of the yards community. As African American workers who worked in the stockyards, and I might add that we have found iconic photos of African Americans working in the stockyard. One photo in the possession of the Chicago Historical Society is dated 1904. So even prior to what we would consider the migration, the Great Migration, African Americans were working in the Chicago Union Stockyards. But certainly after World War I, as the Great Migration really picked up, there were a lot more African American men who came to Chicago, men and women from the South, who already had a skill set because they lived on farms or plantations. They already knew how to slaughter livestock. And so they literally, Gloria, got on that rail line, went into the stockyards, and they were hired on the spot. And so there were a good number of African American men and women working in the stockyards by the time the race riots, as it's called, but massacre certainly it was, began in 1919. And so much so, the fighting was so obviously pivotal that black men and women stopped going to work. And secondly, we found what in my mind should be iconic photo in the annals of Chicago's history, and that is black men and women elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder in front of the Wabash Y to receive their paychecks. So the meat processing firms and companies, the Armors, the Swifts, et cetera, and other companies that were in the back of the yards community made arrangements with the Wabash Y to become a pay station, if I may. And so they were able to go there on a designated date and time
To pick up their
paychecks. And presumably, once it was safe again for them to get back to work, they returned to their employment in the Chicago Union Stockyards.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I know that the work so far, we've looked at the feasibility of using it and found that the structure is feasible.
Yes.
What is the timeline? Like, what's coming up next? And speak a little bit also about the political support. And we talked a little bit about it, but yes, quickly.
So yeah, and I'm going to sort of race through this, and
Yes.
I'm sure in future programming we could take a deeper dive.
Yes.
I mentioned that we reached out to Pat Dowell, and that would have been 2021, February 2021, and Fourth Ward Alderman Sophia King, who also indicated her support for the initiative. On April 29th, 2021, we had our first conversation with Commissioner Maurice Cox. By June of 2021, we had an amazing meeting with Commissioner Cox where we learned that essentially 98% of the embankment is owned between the Cook County Land Bank and the City of Chicago. And that's so critical to a project such as this because we didn't have to go through all of the laborious efforts that other
ownership.
Community groups have had to go through to find out ownership of the rail line. That's, June of 2021. By July of 2022, the City of Chicago let a task order to conduct a feasibility study. That study was completed in December of 2022. We had a community charrette where it was presented to the community at large, and then a final report was submitted to the Department of Planning in January of 2023. From that point, in 2023, certainly because this is a public works project, and it's very important that everyone understands this is not a private, Bronzeville Trail Task Force project. We don't own the rail line. We don't own the embankment. but there's significant funds for infrastructure improvement and development in this country at this date. And for that reason, the project can certainly go forward. So not a lot of structural or funding, I should say, activity occurred, essentially because 2023 was an election year. Certainly in February, there was a primary general election in April of 2023 with a new mayor, Mayor Johnson. I believe it was in June or early July of 2023. Commissioner Cox resigned, Commissioner of the Department of Planning. And certainly Mayor Johnson interviewed candidates, and I think an acting commissioner was named in October or November of 2023, Commissioner Sierra Boatwright, who was confirmed by the City Council. So just because of the nature of this project, there was a bit of a delay, but we received a phone call in November of 2023 from the City of Chicago, where they informed us that they were going to earmark $5 million
That's awesome.
to launch this project in earnest. And in addition to the $5 million from the City of Chicago, we also received a commitment from Cook County that they were prepared to invest $500,000 to get the project started in earnest.
That's awesome.
So that's where we
awesome.
are.
So Imani's going to show a flyer about an upcoming event we have.
All right.
So tell us a little bit about the symposium and the History Project.
So as you know, Gloria, being on the board and certainly being one of the co-chairs of this symposium, as we learned that amazing history about the rail line itself, which we had no idea, we launched what we call the Bronzeville Trail History Project a year ago in December 2022. And in fact, that top photo that was displayed is the photo of an African American working in the Chicago Union Stockyards in the possession of the Chicago Historical Society, and that photo is dated 1904.
Wow.
So on March 17th at Illinois Tech, and you can get more information on our website, www.bronzevilletrail.org, about the symposium. It's a free event, and it starts at 2 p.m. It's going to be in the IIT Towers on the corner of 35th and State Street. I don't have the exact address, but the whole purpose of the symposium is to examine the history of the rail line, the impact it had in propelling Chicago to become the meat processing capital of the world. And then as we learn, and it's just so intuitive, Gloria, that it coincides, the growth of meat packing in Chicago coincides with the Black migration,
That's
the Great
amazing.
Migration. And so we're also going to examine how African Americans were a real central figure in the development of Chicago as the meat processing capital of the world.
So on social media, can you tell people quickly how to find the Bronzeville Trail Task Force and find out more about what we're doing?
Sure. So again, just simply go to www.bronzevilletrail.org. Alternatively, feel free to send us an email at bronzevilletrail@gmail.com. And again, that's bronzevilletrail, and it's one word, @gmail.com. And in either way, you can reach us. And we're all volunteers, but I promise you that someone will get back to you within 24 hours for sure.
Yes, yes. Anything else you want? Because this project is different because it's in the community, but it involves the community in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Sure.
If people want to, when they reach out to you, anything that you're looking for in particular for people to be able to help with coming up?
We need volunteers, and we didn't get a chance to elaborate on them in this session, and I know you intend to
Yes.
talk about them more at a later date. But we have two other companion projects. One has to do with advocating on behalf of Marshall Major Taylor, who moved to Chicago in 1930, passed away in 1932, and amongst other things, our organization is the advocate to get Major Taylor the Congressional Gold Medal. And then last but not least, our third initiative is in partnership with Illinois Tech. We're going to launch an ACE program this summer for high school students. And for those of you who do not know, ACE stands for Architecture, Construction, and Engineering.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's our first session, and we promise that there will be much more information about the trail itself and about upcoming projects during our next shows.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, John.